All right, so we got a real treat for you today. We are interviewing Dr. Mark Kovacs. He is a performance physiologist, researcher, professor, author, speaker, and coach with an extensive background in researching and training top elite athletes. He's coached so many players on tour, as well as top level juniors, and in all types of sports. So we welcome him to Tennis Con. And Mark, tell us some of the coaches, no, I'm sorry, not the coaches. Tell us some of the players that you have worked with.
So first off, thanks for having me. Excited to be here. This sounds like a great event and really honored and privileged to be involved. From my perspective, I've been pretty fortunate. When I worked full-time with the US Tennis Association, I was involved with every player that you see now on tour. So I had different roles depending on the player and their needs. As my background is coaching and sports science, so able to merge those two fields together. So I traveled for 2 years with John Isner. I worked with Robbie Ginepri extensively on the women's side, spent a lot of time with Sloane Stephens, Madison Keys, Christina McHale, but now working a lot with the younger players as well. So spending a lot of time with Frances Tiafoe, Riley Opelka, and some of the younger generation coming up, and really enjoying spending the time, on the development side. And that's really where the exciting part is a lot of these players have great ability, great skill sets, but they're also missing components, or they're developing components. So the same frustrations that they have of trying to get to the next level applies to any player at any level of the game.
That's pretty cool. Now, today we're going to be focused on strength and mobility for players, athletes over 50. Before we get into that, though, one thing I always have wondered is how do you train and help John Isner? To me, since he's so tall, like when I see him play a long match, I'm like, oh my gosh, he just looks like he has a body that is probably going to hurt a lot with the grinding of tennis. How do you keep someone like that fresh?
Yeah, so irrespective of the height, as we know, John's a tall tennis player, but you have to be disciplined and dedicated to the daily work. And John's one of the best I've ever seen at taking care of his body. I mean, he really understands the importance of that. He spends a lot of time every single day taking care of the little details, stretching, stability, mobility, strength, recovery. All those areas are vital for his success and vital for any player's success, but especially when you've got a very large frame and you're being asked to move explosively on a tennis court for 3 hours every day. It's a challenge. It's not an easy thing to do, but just like the NBA athletes that I work with, they have the same challenges and they take care of the same little details. The best ones do anyway. Unfortunately, you have a lot of players that don't, and they struggle a lot with keeping themselves fresh, keeping their body in the shape it needs to be in to, play the sport at the highest levels.
Very, very interesting stuff. So we all know that, Father Time is undefeated. And as we get older, we do start to feel slower, not as strong. Besides just knowing that that's going to happen, what's actually happening to us? What's happening to our bodies? Why does this happen?
So it's a really great question. As you mentioned, time is fleeting. We only have so much available to us. And as we age, there are some physiological things that occur. Muscle mass actually starts to decrease after the age of 40. So we get a slow decline in our muscle mass. That is reversed actually if we do significant amounts of strength training. So it's a term called sarcopenia, which means muscle wasting or muscle loss, and that occurs as we age. The good thing is we know how to reverse that and how to really stave it off if you do a structured, consistent strength training program. So that's something that if people over the age of 50 aren't on a structured strength training program, they're really not taking advantage of something that we know very well now in the research. So that's one aspect. We get this muscle mass decline. We also get a nervous system decline, meaning that the signal from the brain to the muscle is slower than it was when we were younger. So we're not able to be as explosive as we used to be. The signal strength isn't as strong. The ability to recruit the same amount of muscle fibers isn't as good. So that's a nervous system issue, and that's a little bit harder to reverse because that is the nerve related and things like that. What we do want to work on when we understand that is we want to do a better job of anticipation. We want to do a better job of efficiency of movement, meaning that even though the signal strength may not be as powerful, as fast, what we do able to do is the moment we get that signal, we don't have any wasted movement. So that's where the stability piece comes in. If we have good stability in our movements, we don't lose any energy that we have available to us. And that's a technical efficiency issue. That applies to everyone at every level, but it's really, really important as we age. So those are two big factors that happen as we get older. But the good thing is we have strategies to compensate for that or even improve that with the appropriate training. And then the nutrition piece is a huge one because a lot of people don't realize that as we age with the muscle mass loss, we need significantly more amount of protein. So an older adult needs more protein than a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old. And most people don't think like that. They think, okay, a younger, stronger athlete needs more protein. It's actually the reverse. The ability to process and utilize is needed more when we're older. So the recommendations from the research literature is higher amounts of protein as you get older.
Wow. You know what I just realized? You're really smart. Like you are really a smart guy. That is awesome. I mean, that was great, Mark. So tennis is a sport for life. That's one of the biggest things we advertise, and we've got a ton of people signed up for TennisCon over 50. So that's true. So what are some of the good things about tennis? What are some of the good things that playing tennis is doing for our body and for our life?
That's a phenomenal question. And I was fortunate I chaired the International Tennis Federation's Health Benefits of Tennis Task Force. And that was a 3-year project that we worked with the ITF on analyzing the research in this area. We wrote a definitive consensus statement or white paper review on the topic. So this was an area that was very close to me, and I spent a lot of time with a lot of other experts researching, like we said, why is tennis so good for us? What are the benefits? Things like that. And the beauty about tennis is it does just about every physiological response to the body in a positive way because we have to move quickly. So that's a nervous system response. It keeps our nervous system fresh. Brain function, we have to respond cognitively to the ball that's coming to us or our opponent. So it keeps our brain function working at a high level. So that potentially can stave off, brain degenerative type responses. So we also have the ability to have to use our strength, our force quickly. So power production. And power is one of the most important things as we age, is to maintain power output. We used to recommend, walk on a treadmill or walk outside and maybe do the occasional strength training exercise. Now it's, no, let's not go slow with our movements. Let's try to do it as powerfully as we can. So you see a lot of people now recommending, because the research has shown it's more beneficial, high intensity interval work, even when we get older. So the challenge is you have to progress to that appropriately. You have to do movements that are safe and you have to have good technique. But those type of activities give more benefits in a shorter period of time for the older populations. But from a tennis standpoint, it's great for the heart, increasing blood flow, increasing our red blood cell count, which is our aerobic capacity and the ability to utilize oxygen effectively, meaning that we can do everyday tasks a lot easier if we play a lot of tennis. So going to the grocery store, getting in and out of cars, things like that, that become more challenging as we get older, becomes easier because we're in better overall shape. So those are just a handful of things that we know playing tennis allows us to do. There are also these mortality studies and morbidity studies. So mortality is your chance of death, and morbidity is the chance of illness. And as tennis players, we have lower rates of both of those compared to the general population. So tennis players live longer is the catchphrase.
Tennis players live longer. I like that. That's a good catchphrase. Okay, so that's all the positive stuff, and we love that. But we also know we've seen so many people on the court, and they've got the brace here and the brace there, and it looks like they're almost taped together on the court. So there's obviously some things, if we're just playing tennis, some things working against us. So why is tennis can it be dangerous as well when we get older?
Yeah, no, it's very, very important to look at both sides of the equation, and any physical activity has a risk of injury. Sitting on the couch, though, has a greater risk of illness and early death. So it's actually more risky not to do exercise than to do exercise. However, when we do play tennis, there is always that chance of the pulled calf muscle or the tennis elbow or the knee pain or the back pain. And a lot of that has to do with poor training, taking care of your body effectively to make sure that we're strong and stable in the areas that are most commonly injured in tennis athletes. And then also a big one is technique. Technique of strokes and technique of movement increase our injury risk if we do things poorly. If we're using the wrong muscles, we're not using our kinetic chain effectively. Those are factors that we know contribute to injury risk. And then excessive volume. We just have to be careful because a lot of the players that get injured a lot playing tennis are the ones that play a lot. And if you play every day, you go to all these tournaments, you play all these league matches, you have to be smart about how you schedule it. We call it the weekend warrior syndrome for a reason. You work all week and then you play 6 hours of tennis on Saturday and Sunday. That's not a great strategy because you want to be training a little bit every day to keep your body strong and stable, so that when you do play those 5 or 6 hours a day on the weekends, that it's not the only times throughout the week that you're actually doing physical activity. So we need to make sure our schedule, our overall schedule for the week and for the month and the year is done appropriately so our body is prepared for those longer days.
I think that's great. And I think you mentioned one thing that I definitely notice is a big deal. And as we get older, you talked about technique. And that's why I hope a lot of people take advantage of Tennis Con and really go through this material a lot, because we also do have a lot on technique in Tennis Con. And maybe when you were in your 30s, 40s, you could hold the frying pan grip and just literally muscle the ball with your arm. And you might be able to hit the ball if you're a good athlete, 90 to 100 miles an hour with poor technique. And then you keep doing that year after year. Now, all of a sudden, you start to get the rotator cuff injuries. You start to, feel that you're in more pain. And so that's why, as you get older, that's why I believe, let me know what you think about this. There's certain coaches out there like, oh, John, you don't need to learn that technique because, you just don't need that. You just stick with what you got. And that's really it. That other stuff is for the pros. But you study this stuff. My opinion is, not being a doctor, that if you watch the strokes today, they're much more efficient, much more easy on the body, and everybody wants to hit the ball hard anyway, and you can hit the ball harder with less effort. So I encourage people to learn the new strokes, especially if they have technique that is dangerous. If you have old classical strokes and they're efficient, maybe I'm not talking to you. But if you're somebody that knows your strokes have deficiencies, I think it's good to learn the new stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, your perspective is great because there's a couple factors to this. If you learnt with wood rackets, you typically couldn't have terrible technique. You wouldn't be able to make solid contact, and the rackets were too heavy and too slow through the air to generate any significant pace. So most people that learned their strokes with wood rackets have very good technique. They have more classical strokes, typically more traditional movements, but technically we feel reasonably good about their ability to make solid contact using the bigger muscle groups, things like that. If you've learned in the last, say, 30 to 40 years, you've learned with modern rackets. And the challenge with the modern rackets is it allows you, due to how light they are and the string technology, to use inappropriate technique and still put the ball in the court. So the challenge with that is it allows people to play more tennis, and people that maybe weren't very good technically still be competitive, but it does open the door for much more poor technique. So using efficient technique is vitally important for safety purposes. And like you said, it makes sense if they're doing it correctly to learn the right technique. Just need to make sure that they understand what the right technique is. I think there's a lot of discussion, unfortunately, in the coaching world sometimes of what is good and bad technique. We know what good technique is from a safety standpoint, from an injury risk standpoint, and then there's a lot of style that people put around the fundamentals of good technique.
Very, very interesting stuff. So you mentioned that if you're just going out there and you are the weekend warrior, that you are putting yourself at some risk, and that's why you might be hurting. So what are some of the things that we can do to keep the bad things from happening? Where do we get just started, building some good habits?
Sure. So we got to first understand the most common areas for the older tennis player where those injuries occur. So the calf muscle is one of the most commonly injured areas in an older player. Knees become a challenge, and there's a lot of factors why people get knee pain: osteoarthritis, meniscus problems, cartilage issues, a bunch of different factors that contribute. Lower back is the #1 issue in all athletes across all sports, and especially as we age. And then we go up to the shoulder and the elbow. And those are the main target areas that we have to have a good strategy around. So stretching out your ankles, so ankle dorsiflexion. So if this is your ankle here, being able to do that very well is really important. So pointing your toes to the sky and pressing against a wall is a very simple exercise to stretch your calves out, increase your ankle mobility. Doing that daily is a vital thing to do. So we recommend as many times a day as you can realistically do it. It should be done. It can be done anywhere. We tell our pro athletes, do it every time you go to the bathroom and every time you eat food. That allows you to give yourself a trigger of 30 seconds. I'm going to stretch that out. It's a really simple kind of strategy to take into account. From a standpoint of the knees itself, there's not a lot we can do specifically to strengthen the knee. What we have to do is strengthen the muscles around it. And the things that support the knee are your hip strength. So you got to make sure that your hips are strong. That's where appropriate strength training comes in. That's where you need to make sure you're doing a lot of single leg type activity where we're loading our hips appropriately. So spending time on the hip strength is very, very important, not only to help with reduction in knee related pain, but it also takes pressure off your lower back, because the hips, specifically your glutes, so the big muscles of your butt, that is what needs to be strengthened, because that's where our muscle mass is. Then by taking care of that, we reduce a little bit on the knees and the lower back. And then the lower back specifically, we all hear about core strength, but most people don't spend that much time actually training core strength. So simple things like planks, which I think most people are pretty familiar with nowadays, should be done every day to 5 days a week at a minimum. Try to get those planks in your routine. It can be in work clothes. You can do it while you're on a conference call. You don't have to get dressed up and go to the gym to do core strengthening work. You can do that in between breaks throughout your normal day. So making sure that we do a series of different planks, regular planks, side planks, variations of isometric movements is what those are called. You're not actually moving. You're just bracing and activating your muscles of your core. And that's been shown to be really, really beneficial. We want to be a little cautious about too many crunches when we get older. It's been shown to potentially cause more problems than help, especially in the older population. So isometric activities for the core are more recommended. So that's a big area for the core muscles. And then as we go up to the shoulder, doing a simple series of 2 or 3 shoulder exercises about 5 days a week is also really beneficial. And external rotation strength, which if we had a tubing, most people are familiar with tubing. The tubing's coming this way. External rotation is here to here. So we're just going away from the body. It's a very, very simple movement. Strengthens our rotator cuff in the external rotation range of motion. And that's typically where tennis players become weaker and weaker as they age. And that doesn't allow us to decelerate as efficiently. And deceleration is usually where most of the injuries occur. We always think we want to hit the ball harder, so we accelerate through our target. We don't typically get injured during acceleration. We get injured trying to slow ourselves down and the forces it takes to slow ourselves down. So we have to make sure we strengthen the decelerators in the body. So, and then, tennis elbow is always an issue. The thing with tennis elbow is very rarely, if ever, does a good tennis player get tennis elbow. Tennis elbow is for poor technique. It's a result of poor technique. If you look at the professional tennis tour, we don't see tennis elbow. We see medial elbow pain or golfer's elbow on the inside of the elbow. That's more common, But tennis elbow is only an issue with recreational players, and it's only an issue if you have really poor technique. It's important to take care of your technique if you have tennis elbow, and then how you treat that. We do a lot of different things at our institute to help people with tennis elbow and things like that. But in general, first take care of the technique, and then we'll treat the symptoms.
Wow, that was great stuff. I want to maybe first start with tennis elbow and then work my way backwards, because you said a lot of good things. First of all, just a tip. I just want to make sure you confirm it, since you are the doctor on of the two of us. But I noticed that when I see a lot of people kind of have tennis elbow, especially on the backhand, they tend to have weak grip, so they're kind of like hitting their shot like this, and then so they get that there, and then on the forehand, rather than coming here, they do lots of this type stuff, and you see the way the wrist is moving, and then even just demoing that that can tend to hurt. Would you say that's where it kind of happens, maybe like late contact and kind of like funky follow throughs that make the wrist go weak and run up the arm?
100%. What you described are the two most common reasons. On the backhand side, they lead with the elbow bent, and then they extend out like that. And if you just look at what happens there, you see all that movement, and that is a #1 issue. And then on the forehand, like you mentioned, they don't get good extension through their target. So most people don't realize what they see on TV, those pros that have that great finish over the shoulder and all of that. That happens very late in the swing. It's just the swing is so fast that they get through the target, they make contact with the ball, their racket is fully extended, their arm's fully extended all the way out, and then they come across. That's way after the ball's been hit. Recreational players do that way too early sometimes, and that causes them to use their wrist. Unfortunately, a lot of the reasons they do that is they're trying to get topspin, and they don't have enough racket speed to do it. So what they do, they break early and they try to brush the side of the ball. And that unfortunately puts a lot of stress on the elbow. Better way to get topspin is to use your body better. Get below the ball, get your swing path more appropriate, meaning the racket below the ball, the hips below the ball, and extend through your target excessively forward, which will allow you to still get the topspin. So if we think about a Rafael Nadal, for example, or he has full extension after he makes ball contact, and then he finishes across his shoulder and above his shoulder or above his head with the way he finishes all the different ways. However, he has full extension. So that's one of the things I think the recreational player either doesn't do, isn't aware of, or just needs better education around that.
Very good stuff. Now, when you're talking about, one thing I love is, so many people will say, well, yeah, I mean, I do this, I do that, I got a job, I got a family, tennis is pretty much all I got time. That's my exercise. And that's a dangerous way to go. That's where I think you see most of the people out there, and they're all bandaged up. And what I love about what you're saying is a lot of this stuff you can do just even as you're interacting with somebody. You could be eating lunch and then flexing up, right, to work on your calves with your ankle move there. Now, if I'm doing that one calf move, is it where I want to hold for 30 seconds? Am I just doing the exercise like this for 30 seconds? What do you recommend as far as like time of hold and things like that?
Well, initially, just recommend a 20 to 30 second hold. Keep it simple. And then over time, we have more advanced ways to stretch, where we do a hold and release, or it's called an active isolated movement, where we may go for 2 seconds and release and do 2 more seconds and release and go further and further and further. That's more aggressive. It increases our range quicker. However, it can also be more uncomfortable and things like that. So for most people, initially we start with a 20 to 30 second hold one time. Do it a few times a day when you find the time or you remember. Some people, if they're really disciplined, they'll set a buzzer on their phone, and every 2 hours it'll give them a quick buzz, and they'll be like, okay, I got to do my ankle and calf stretching, and it's just a reminder. So there's a lot of ways to get the result. Some are quicker than others, but usually when you try to do things quickly, you increase your risk, which isn't a bad thing if you know what you're doing. It's a risk-reward question. And for most people, if you don't have a good background in this, or you don't have someone coaching you, 20 to 30 seconds, 4 or 5 times a day is a great starting point recommendation.
I'm doing my ankles right now. All right, another one you mentioned, which really hit home to me. Now, the good news for me so far is my knees are pretty good. I'm fine with that. But when you mentioned that, you really can't do much to specifically strengthen the knees, you got to work around that, and a big part of that is your hips. Now, that's when you hit a hot zone for me, because I feel like my hips I just feel like this whole part of my body is just like locked up lots of times, and then that can throw off my lower back. And you mentioned single leg exercises to strengthen the hip. Can you give us an example of that? And maybe we'll even put a picture up by you if you can explain it well, and we'll just show some examples. But I would love to know just for myself what you meant by that, the single leg hip exercises.
So there's a lot of hip stability exercises that can be done 2-leg or single leg. The first obvious one is called a single leg squat. Very simple movement. Anyone can do it. You lift one leg up and you keep one leg on the ground, and you just go into a quarter or a half squat position. So you go down as low as you can without you starting to waver, wiggle. Your knee doesn't want to go inward. So if this is my leg, you don't want your knee to go in towards the other knee. You want to be as stable as possible and go down as deep as you can without your heels of your feet coming off the ground or without your chest leaning forward too much. So that's a very simple exercise. It's a single leg squat movement. And really the objective there is just, can we get good stability through that part of the body?
All right, very cool. That's a good one. I think I'm going to do that today. Now, is it okay if I cheat? Like if I just feel maybe not so confident with that, where if I go down just with one leg, I mean, I'll try it, but is it okay to like hold on to a chair for support and do that as well?
We always recommend do it with a couch or a chair behind you. So if you feel like you're losing your balance, you have something to sit into. So that's always, or have, like you said, a chair rail or a post or something next to you that you can grab onto. So that's definitely an appropriate thing to do. The next variation, or you can actually do it in any order, is the reverse of that. So what you do is you actually sit on a stable box or a chair or a bench, and you actually try to stand up from that position with one leg only. So that's for many people maybe a lot harder. Even though you're going from sitting to standing, you feel more balanced because you're sitting as a starting position, but you actually have to break inertia. So go from zero movement to movement, which is one of the hardest things in any activity to do, is to go from zero to movement. And then you want to stand straight up without leaning forward. Because what you're going to typically do is lean forward, shift all your weight onto your quad and put pressure on your knee, instead of sitting back and putting all your weight in your glutes and your hamstrings.
Very good stuff. Can you give us, before we let you go, can you give us maybe 3 to 5 examples of what would be increasing your strength, and then maybe 3 to 5 examples of things you can do that would help you be more mobile, get you a little more explosive? Like what's going to get you stronger? What's going to get you faster?
Perfect question. Also, to get faster, you have to be stronger. You can't, unless you just work on technique and you make an efficiency improvement, you can't get that much faster without getting a good base of strength. So it's really, really important that you really focus on both simultaneously. And the strength side, relatively easy, but you have to be smart about how you do that. So you want to make sure you can do a lot of this body weight. For most of the people watching, we don't have to go to the gym necessarily. You can, and you can probably get results maybe a little bit quicker with good training and good coaching, but you want to make sure you can do some simple stuff. So for example, if you can't do 20 body weight squats effectively, then there's no point adding a significant amount of weight before you can do that. Wall sits. Wall sits is a very old exercise, very simple exercise. You sit on a wall, you try to have your knees bent at 90 degrees, you try to have your hips bent at 90 degrees, and you sit there as long as you can. And for some of you, that may be 20 seconds. For others of you, that may be a minute. For some of you out there, you may be able to get to 2 to 3 minutes. But if you do that regularly, you're going to get a lot of hip strength, a lot of leg strength, a lot of quad strength. So that's very, very valuable. And then from a standpoint of, you see, I talk a lot about the lower body because in tennis, it's a very much a lower body sport. We have to do upper body activity, upper body exercise, but the challenge is we want to use the lower body to contribute as much of our force and strength as possible and let our upper body be strong, but transfer that energy and transfer that strength and force. So those are some areas to focus on from that perspective. When we're talking about getting more explosive, that's when we got to start doing what's called plyometrics or jumping movements or explosive first step activities. The challenge is if you've got a lot of pain, these become a lot more difficult to do because anytime you jump, you increase the forces significantly when you land. The jumping part's easy, relatively. The landing part is what hurts people because you're landing. If I jump straight up and land on the same spot, I have about 3 times my body weight that I have to absorb on the landing. Whereas when I jump, I'm only jumping my body weight. So that's why landing is so difficult for so many people. So we have to build up our ability to land so that we can get more explosive off those first few steps. So a few ways we work on that is we do what's called low-level plyometrics, where you will actually jump on one leg, kind of like skipping, where you will jump up and down, 5 times. And on a single leg, just jump up and down and see how that feels. If you can handle that, then we can progress to jumping a little bit further or a little bit higher. If you have trouble jumping 5 times like this, we know that we're pretty much at your current limit. And then what we try to do is add 1 time every few days. So we hopefully maybe I'll push that up to 10 times in a week. So that's a starting point. Then we want to work on, say, court sprint movements, where we get on a court or an open space and we work on split step and then moving 2 to 3 steps. Remember, good tennis players cover the court in 2 to 3 steps between shots. They don't take 20 steps between shots. That is because they feel strong, they feel stable, they feel like they can get to the ball appropriately. Whereas people that don't feel strong and stable, they don't do that. They take a lot of little steps because they don't feel like they've got the strength to take bigger steps, and they don't feel like they're comfortable or stable as they take those wider steps. So our goal is to try to develop a little bit wider base per step and try to take slightly larger steps. The challenge with doing that is you have to build the strength and feel like you're comfortable doing that. And that's one of the things we see. The reason Usain Bolt wins his races in the 100 meters is because he takes 1.5 steps less than everyone else. So he's covering the distance in the air more than he's on the ground. As we age, that becomes harder and harder to do. We take smaller steps. That's just the nature of it. But our goal is to slow that process down and don't let us go into the habit of taking smaller steps until we really have to.
That's great. And our theme for TennisCon is to play younger, stronger, faster by eliminating your leaks in your game and inefficiencies. And what you just said is so important because I don't think most recreational players, there's some that like take the actual art of footwork and movement and work on it where most don't. So I truly believe you can get your step back that maybe you had 10 years ago when you were more athletic, and even though you weren't efficient with your movement, you got to the ball pretty quickly. Well, now we need to really study this stuff and we can get our step back. And tell me, this is just like a pet peeve of mine, and maybe you can just make me feel good. If no one else gets it, at least it'll be good to hear you say it. How much do you work with players, even if you're on the court, without hitting a ball, to where you're like working on footwork, working on shadow strokes? My theory is, look, if you can't do it without the ball, when I magically feed you a ball, not everything's just gonna fall into place for you. If you can't do it without the ball, because lots of people, like, you get them to do this stuff and they feel awkward, they feel silly, they feel stupid. Like, well, I need to see a ball. I just can't do it like this.
Yeah, no. I mean, that's how you train any skill. You train it in a closed environment without distraction. So the ball adds distraction. The ball adds a level of complexity, which at some point we need because that's tennis. But to learn the skill and learn the footwork pattern and learn the efficient way to move from A to B, that's how we teach every athlete. When I work with NFL athletes or Major League Baseball athletes on movement, same thing. Everything's done without a stimulus first because we have to teach the basics. Even some of the fastest people in the world, that's how they train on a daily basis. Even when they're at the top of their sport, they're trying to get better. So if the recreational player doesn't feel like they're above that, or that they need a ball to make it real, you have to educate them about it's not about making it real or not real, or realistic or not realistic. It's about helping you get comfortable with your skill, and then adding the complexity and the difficulty of a ball coming at you and making those decisions as you see the ball come to you.
Mark, I do educate them on that. And the look I get is, and that I think is the big difference between the pro athletes and the amateur athletes is, you know, the amateur athletes in the beginning, they'll kind of listen to everything you say. Then they get to a certain level and they're like, yeah, I don't need that anymore. Where the pro athletes, even though it looks like they can do a lot of this stuff in their sleep, they're still willing to do it. Rafael Nadal is still willing to be in the locker room doing shadow strokes, hitting a forehand, even though he has one of the greatest forehands of all time. And that's what keeps them sharp. Am I right on that?
100%. And they're always looking for that 1% improvement every day. So they're never satisfied. They're never comfortable. They're always looking to be better. And that's just a great trait of successful individuals across all sports and all aspects of life as well, is you're never satisfied. You know, you're always looking to see, how can I do a little bit better in whatever it is that I do.
Very cool. All right, to end, how many times, especially for the person who says, I'm just getting started, or you don't understand my life, I'm so busy, how many times a week do we need to be doing this stuff, and how long?
So there's a few ways you can set this up. You know, we know from the research that, say, for strength training, doing 2 days a week is the minimum to get really significant improvement. 3 days a week is significantly better than 2. So if you're trying to limit it, 2 days at the absolute minimum. 3 days is more of an ideal if you're time constrained. So, and that doesn't have to be much longer than 20 minutes at a session. If it's done with relatively high intensity, not a lot of waiting around, go do your 6 to 8 exercises, get it done, you know, 2 to 3 sets, and you can get really good benefit, at least the initial 6 weeks to 3 month time period. Because if you're relatively out of shape, or you haven't done this for a while, you get a lot of improvements in a 6 week to 3 month period without doing that much. Then after that, you may need to ramp up the level, maybe a little more time or more days per week. But initially, that's a great starting point. That's usually the initial recommendation. You should be able to find 60 minutes a week, 20-minute sessions 3 times a week. I think everyone can find that time frame. There's no excuse to not find that. Then if you want to get better and better, you know, 3 hours a week total for all this is a realistic next step. You know, and then depending on your lifestyle and your interests and your priorities, you know, we can do things every day. You would then start altering your program. And that's a lot of the work we do, is we help individuals with that, determining what's appropriate, what do you need, what specifically is the athlete needing at all levels, because everyone is different. Personalized programs are really important.
This was a great interview. It's going to be one of those that, and that's why I think people should pick up the on-demand pass, where you can watch this over and over again, because there are so many things you said that I'm like, okay, I literally am writing notes for myself, going, okay, I got to do that, I got to do that, got to do the single leg, got to do the wall squats, and so you broke down so many great things. Now, you do have a couple things people can check out. One that I think would be really good is you have a book, Complete Conditioning for Tennis. Did I say that right?
Correct, and that's a project I worked with the Dr. Paul Roden and Dr. Todd Allenbecker on, and it's just a really great resource about how to train better for tennis. Exercises, that has some videos there. Human Kinetics is the publisher. It's one of the top resources for just general how to strength train, how to work on mobility, how to work on injury prevention. So very good resource from that standpoint. They can check that out either at my website at kovacsinstitute.com, which is our training and assessment institute, and they can take a look at the information there. So that's a great resource for this group.
Very cool. And now you said it's a book, but then you said there's videos. Is it a digital book?
So no, it's a hard copy book. It's in all the bookstores, Barnes and Noble and things like that. but then it has an online link with a series of videos for a lot of the exercises.
I love that. That's very, very cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. You did awesome. I think a lot of this stuff you said are writer downers and then doers. You know, write it down, make a plan, do it. Thanks so much. Is there anything you want to say before you leave us?
No, I just appreciate everything you're doing. And if people want to connect with me, if they're on Twitter, it's mkovacs PhD. Or they can go to the Kovacs Institute, either on Twitter or Facebook, and get involved. We do a lot of different things from an education standpoint on those sites.
Awesome. Great stuff. Thanks so much. This is the way to end this week as far as TennisCon with our avoiding injuries over 50. I think it's super important because you're watching all this great material on how to improve your serve, how to weaponize your ground strokes, how to implement strategies. But you know, if we can't get on the court because we're hurt, or we're on the court and we know that, well, I really can't play the way I want to anymore because this hurts and that hurts, we can do a lot of stuff to reverse the aging process and feel good on the court. So I want to thank Mark, and you guys have a great day out there.